The stars above gleamed like diamonds scattered across an endless black sea, a backdrop to the sprawling, technological marvel that was a galactic cruiser Eclipse. Inside, the low hum of the engines filled the air, reverberating through the metal walls. The crew, an eclectic mix of species from across the galaxy, worked in unison as they glided through a void, unaware that their lives were about to be turned upside down. Captain Xena Tiber, a seasoned and sharp-witted human, stood at the helm of the bridge, her eyes scanning the holographic readouts in front of her. Her crew was an odd one: Vrogar, a massive four-armed alien with an affinity for smashing things; Talina, an ethereal being who could bend light around herself, making her a formidable scout; and Kale, a half-human, half-robot officer whose mechanical enhancements often made him the go-to guy for tech troubles. They were a well-oiled machine, used in navigating the unpredictable challenges of space travel. But today, the usual calm of the cruiser was shattered by a distress call that made Xena's blood run cold. Unidentified vessel. Unidentified vessel. This is Captain Xena Tiber of the Eclipse. Respond immediately. Xena's voice crackled over the comms. The crew paused in their work, exchanging worried glances. The signal was faint, too faint to pinpoint its origin, but there was something unsettling about it, a feeling Xena couldn't quite place. Maybe it's a trap, Vrogar grumbled, his sharp teeth glinting as he flexed his massive arms. Sounds like a setup. We can't assume that, Xena replied, her tone resolute. We're going to investigate. Prepare for a possible rescue mission. The crew nodded, their faces lit by the glow of the console's displays. They were all in agreement. They had no idea what they would find, but a crew in distress was a crew in need. That was their job. Or so they thought. As they approached the source of the distress signal, the Eclipse dropped out of warp speed with a jolt, sending a ripple through the crew. The silence that followed was thick with anticipation, the bridge lit only by the soft blue glow of the consoles. Outside, a strange vessel drifted in the emptiness, sleek, with an organic curvature that seemed almost alive. It looked like something out of a nightmare. Scan for life signs, Xena ordered, her voice tense. Talina's fingers danced over the holographic interface. Her eyes narrowed in concentration. Reading. Humanoid life forms. But something's off. It's faint. Almost like they're not entirely alive. Before Xena could respond, the ship's comms flared to life with a sharp crackle. A voice, low and guttural, echoed through the speakers. Human insects, it spat, the words heavy with contempt. You dare approach our vessel? Xena's grip tightened on the armrest of her chair. Who is this? Identify yourself. Foolish creature, the voice growled. We are the Eldrith, and you? There was a pause, as if the being was trying to find the right words. You are nothing but a pest, a swarm that must be eradicated. But it matters not. We shall see your species squirm before we end it. The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving a stunned silence in its wake. Xena's crew exchanged uneasy looks. The voice had a quality to it that unsettled them, like it wasn't just speaking through a comm system. It was speaking directly into their minds. I don't like this, Kale said, his mechanical eyes scanning the alien vessel. This is bad. This feels wrong. Agreed, Xena muttered, but we're not backing down. Prepare for boarding. Vrogar, Talina, Kale, you're with me. They suited up quickly, the cold air of the docking bay biting at their exposed skin. The moment the airlock to the alien ship opened, a wave of strange energy washed over them, making the hairs on the back of their necks stand on end. The atmosphere was heavy with an alien presence, an almost suffocating force that seemed to distort the very fabric of space around them. Stay alert, Xena warned, her voice steady as she led the way into the unknown. We don't know what we're dealing with here. The interior of the Elder vessel was a stark contrast to the sterile, mechanical corridors of the Eclipse. The walls were alive, pulsating with strange, organic veins that glowed faintly in the dim light. The air was thick with a strange, metallic scent, and the very floor seemed to shift underfoot as though the ship itself was alive, breathing. Well, this is pleasant, Vrogar muttered, his massive fists clenched as he scanned the surroundings. Keep it together, Xena snapped. We're here to save lives, not to comment on the decor. The crew advanced cautiously, moving deeper into the ship. As they rounded a corner, they froze in place. Standing before them were the Eldrith, tall, insectoid beings with jagged exoskeletons and eyes that glowed an eerie shade of green. Their chitinous limbs twitched, as if anticipating an attack. They towered over the crew, their presence intimidating and unsettling. "Human insects!" One of the Eldrith hissed again, its voice full of disdain. "You dare to trespass into our domain? You will regret this." Xena's heart pounded in her chest, but she refused to show fear. "We're not here to fight. We're here to help. Now tell us what's going on." The Eldrith's eyes narrowed as they circled the crew. "Help? You cannot help what is already beyond help. You are nothing but pests in our sight, but you shall learn soon enough. Soon you will understand the terror that comes with facing us." As they advanced, Xena's mind raced. The crew was outmatched, outnumbered, and facing an enemy that seemed determined to annihilate them. But one thing was clear: these aliens had underestimated them. They had no idea who they were dealing with, and that, Xena knew, would be their downfall. The air was thick with tension as the Eldrith encircled Xena and her crew, their insectoid eyes gleaming with malicious intent. Xena's mind raced, trying to formulate a plan, but the eerie calm of the Eldrith was unnerving. They were powerful, their exoskeletons reflecting the dim light in a sickly sheen, and they were fully prepared to obliterate anything that stood in their way. "We need to think fast," Kale murmured under his breath, his mechanical arms twitching as he accessed the internal systems of his body. "I can try to override their security systems, but that will take time. We need a distraction." Xena glanced over at her crew. Talina, ever the opportunist, was already calculating the best way to use her unique abilities. Her body shimmered slightly, bending the light around her in a way that made her almost invisible, but she wasn't ready to make her move yet. Vrogar, on the other hand, looked ready to charge in head first, his massive frame twitching with excitement. He was the muscle of the group, but even his strength wouldn't be enough to take down an entire swarm of Eldrith. The Eldrith leader, a particularly tall creature with jagged claws that looked like they could tear through metal, stepped forward, its voice cold and venomous. "Do you think you can outwit us humans? Your primitive minds cannot fathom the depths of our power. You are insects to us, disposable." Xena stood her ground, her eyes locking with the Eldrith leader. "You're making a big mistake. We're not as weak as you think." The Eldrith hissed, its sharp mandibles clicking with disdain. "Then prepare to die like all others who have dared to challenge us." It raised a massive claw, ready to strike. In that moment, Xena acted on instinct. She shoved Kale behind her, signaling Talina to move. The ethereal scout melted into the shadows, using her ability to bend light, to become nearly invisible. Without hesitation, Vrogar charged forward, his powerful fists crashing into the nearest Eldrith soldier, sending it tumbling backward. The creature screeched in pain as its body crumpled, but Xena didn't have time to watch. "Kale, now!" Xena shouted as the Eldrith leader swung its claw toward her. Kale, quick on the uptake, deployed his tech arm, sending a pulse of electricity into the ship systems. The vessel jolted as if it had been struck by lightning, sending a cascade of sparks flying from the walls. The Eldrith howled in fury as their communication systems were disrupted. They staggered backward. Temporarily disoriented, their connection to each other severed. Xena took the opportunity to push forward, pulling out her blaster and firing a series of shots that rang through the chamber. They weren't lethal. She wasn't here to kill, but they were enough to incapacitate a few of the alien soldiers, knocking them out of their vicious stride. Vrogar continued to plow through the Eldrith soldiers, his fists moving with precision despite his size. Each blow seemed to land with thunderous force, sending the creatures reeling. Talina, now visible once more, darted from shadow to shadow, disorienting the aliens with her ability to warp light. The Eldrith were confused and growing increasingly frustrated, but they had underestimated the ingenuity of the human crew. "You won't win," the Eldrith leader snarled, its claws now slick with energy as it advanced. "You are nothing. Do you think you can stop the end of your kind?" Xena's eyes narrowed. "We're not here to end. We're here to survive." But the fight was far from over. The Eldrith leader had realized their strategy and was preparing for a counterattack. With a guttural roar, it slammed its claws into the ground, sending out a shockwave that reverberated through the ship. The crew was momentarily thrown off balance, the tremors knocking them to the floor. "Everyone, hold on," Xena shouted, regaining her footing. She scanned the area for any signs of weakness, but the Elders were quickly adapting to their tactics. The tension was mounting. They were running out of time and options. Kale's voice crackled through their comms. "I'm trying to disable their power grid, but it's heavily fortified. I need more time." "We don't have time." Xena snapped. She turned to Vrogar. "Can you hold them off for a few minutes?" Vrogar grinned, his sharp teeth gleaming. "I'll make them regret underestimating us," he growled, stepping forward with renewed confidence. With Vrogar at the front, Xena and Kale took a step back to regroup. Talina, already 2 steps ahead, moved fluidly across the battlefield, picking off stragglers with swift precision. The battle was far from won, but they were gaining ground. The key was to keep the pressure on, to show the Eldred that they were not just human insects to be squashed beneath their claws. As Xena fired another round into an oncoming soldier, her mind whirred with calculations. There had to be a way to turn the tables in their favor, to use the ship's environment against them. She could see the weak points now, cracks in the Eldred's defenses that they were too proud to notice. "We have to get to the control room," Xena shouted, her voice rising above the chaos. "We can take their ship down from the inside." "Let's do it," Kale replied, his robotic limbs moving with mechanical precision as he bolted ahead. The crew regrouped and charged toward the control room, the sound of their footsteps drowned out by the howls of the Eldred in pursuit. As they approached the heart of the vessel, Xena knew they had only one chance to make it out alive. The stakes had never been higher, and the odds were stacked against them. But with creativity, determination, and the unity of a team that refused to back down, they had a fighting chance. In that moment, Xena realized something crucial. They had already won, not in the battle they were fighting, but in the refusal to be defeated. The Eldred had underestimated them, and that was the one mistake they would not be able to recover from. The control room doors loomed ahead, and Xena's pulse quickened. She could hear the heavy footsteps of the Eldred soldiers behind them, their shrill hisses cutting through the air like a blade. The crew had fought their way through the corridors, but it was clear that the Elders were regrouping, and they would be facing an army soon. Their only chance now was to reach the control room and take command of the ship. "We're almost there," Kale yelled over his shoulder, his voice full of urgency. His mechanical limbs had started to show signs of wear from the relentless battle, but he was pushing through, using every bit of energy he had left. Xena kept her eyes ahead, focused on the task at hand. Vrogar, a few paces ahead of them, was already preparing for the inevitable. He spun around, cracking his knuckles as he grinned. "This is it. We make our stand here." Talina, her form flickering between visibility and invisibility, was the last in the line, watching their backs with calculated precision. She had become the team's ghost in this fight, slipping in and out of shadows to confuse and disorient their enemies. But even she couldn't keep up this strategy indefinitely. With a deafening crash, the doors of the control room slid open, revealing the alien technology inside. It was a stark contrast to the organic, insectoid feel of the rest of the ship. Sleek, metallic walls hummed with a soft blue light. The central command console sat in the middle, an imposing monolith of advanced technology that pulsed with power. Xena could almost feel the energy radiating off of it. But the moment they stepped inside, the battle outside ceased. The Eldred leader, its towering figure blocking the doorway, stood with a predatory grin. "You really think you can control our ship?" it sneered. The soldiers behind it growled in unison, preparing to pounce. Xena took a breath and stepped forward, her fingers grazing the console's interface. The connection was immediate. Her eyes flared with excitement as data began pouring in, feeding her mind with information faster than she could process. She knew this was their only chance. If they couldn't gain control of the ship's systems now, the Eldred would crush them. "I've got control of the basic systems," she shouted. "But the command override is locked behind a security protocol." "We can't afford to wait," Kale responded, stepping beside her. His eyes darted to the door, then to the rapidly advancing Eldrith. You'll have to bypass it manually. I can buy you some time, but we need more firepower. Xena nodded, her fingers flying across the console, trying to break through the encryption. Sweat dripped down her brow, her heartbeat syncing with the rapid rhythm of her hands. The console flickered as if it recognized her efforts and fought back, sending electrical pulses down her fingertips. But Xena gritted her teeth and persevered. Vrogar, now! She ordered, not looking up. With a roar, Vrogar surged forward, slamming his fists into the elder soldiers blocking the doorway. The first soldier collapsed under the force of the blow, and the second wasn't far behind. The remaining elder soldiers hesitated, perhaps trying to assess whether the situation was worth the risk. But their leader, unfazed, stepped forward. You still don't understand, do you? The Eldritch leader's voice was low, its mandibles clicking menacingly. You humans are nothing but a distraction. This ship is ours, and so is the galaxy. You're wrong. Xena shot back, her hands never stopping their movement across the interface. This ship will be ours, and we're not done yet. In that moment, the console finally yielded. A message flashed on the screen. Override successful. Xena's heart skipped a beat. They had control. Get to the weapon systems, she shouted. Kale's robotic limbs whirred as he sprinted to the side of the control room. His eyes scanned the control panels, accessing weapons protocols, while Talina darted around the room, moving unseen as she prepared to assist however she could. But just as the tide seemed to shift in their favor, the Eldritch leader let out a terrifying shriek. You are playing with forces far beyond your understanding, humans. With one swift motion, it lunged, its claws slashing through the air. Xena barely managed to duck, but the force of the strike caused her to stumble. Kale reacted instantly, unleashing a burst of electricity from his arm toward the Eldritch, but the creature seemed unaffected. Its thick exoskeleton absorbed the energy like it was nothing. You're going to need more than that to stop me, the leader taunted, its voice dripping with menace. Xena's mind raced. She had to think quickly. If they couldn't stop the Eldritch leader here, they would be trapped. The Eldritch soldiers had fallen back for now, but that wouldn't last. She needed a solution, and fast. The control room's walls were lined with high-tech weaponry. A few meters away, she spotted something that made her pulse quicken, a weapon console built into the wall. It wasn't part of the ship's original design, something they had integrated. It was a long-range energy cannon that could disrupt the entire ship's power grid. Xena didn't hesitate. Vrogar, cover me, she yelled. Vrogar grinned, swinging his massive fist in an arc to send the nearest elder soldier crashing to the ground. He grunted. I've got you, Captain. Go. Xena bolted across the room toward the weapon console, her mind focused on nothing but the task at hand. As she approached, the Eldritch leader lunged at her, but in the split second before it struck, Xena managed to activate the cannon. A pulse of energy shot through the room, engulfing the alien leader in a blinding light. The shockwave sent the Eldritch leader stumbling back, disoriented. For a moment, everything was silent. Then, the leader's body crumpled to the floor, smoke rising from its exoskeleton. Xena's breath came in ragged gasps as she turned to face her crew. We've won. But the victory didn't feel quite as sweet as she'd hoped. The Eldritch were far from finished, and the battle was far from over. But for the first time since this all started, Xena felt a surge of hope. They had gained the upper hand, and that meant everything. The control room was eerily quiet, the hum of the ship's systems the only sound as the team gathered their bearings. Xena stood in front of the central console, her fingers still twitching over the controls. But her mind was elsewhere. The fight wasn't over, not by a long shot. The Eldritch might have lost their leader, but the war was far from won. Is it really over? Talina's voice broke through Xena's thoughts. She had materialized beside her, the faint outline of her body shimmering with her ability to remain hidden. The tension in the air was palpable, and the feeling of victory was tempered with the harsh reality that there were still Eldritch soldiers left, still traps they hadn't discovered, and still many obstacles ahead. We've gained the upper hand, Xena said, her voice steady, but her gaze never leaving the console. But this ship isn't just theirs. It's a key to something much bigger. We've only just begun to scratch the surface. Talina's expression softened, but there was no denying concern in her eyes. They had already been through so much, surviving the Eldrith ambush, fighting off wave after wave of enemy soldiers, and now, having secured control of their ship. But the true challenge, the one that still loomed before them, was what the Eldrith had planned for the galaxy. What had they wanted with the ship, and more importantly, with the data stored inside? "I'm not sure we're ready for what's coming," Cale said, his voice mechanical but laced with a rare sense of doubt. He had been the most optimistic of them all, but now, his words carried a weight that had been absent in their earlier victories. Xena turned to him, her expression hardening. "We've come this far, Cale. We've fought for every inch of ground. We'll figure this out." Vrogar, still covered in the remnants of the battle, chuckled as he wiped his hands on his pants. "You humans sure know how to make things interesting. I'm glad I'm on your side." There was a brief moment of shared laughter, but it was fleeting. The gravity of their situation had not been lost on any of them. Every victory so far felt like a small miracle, but none of them were under any illusion that they were invincible. They had survived the Eldrith leader's ambush, but what if there was something more to the enemy's plans? "I've patched into the ship's mainframe," Xena said, bringing the conversation back to the heart of the matter. "There's a lot of encrypted data here, and I think we need to decrypt it as soon as possible. Whatever the Eldrith were planning, it's big." As Xena worked to unlock the remaining systems, Cale moved to a nearby terminal, his fingers flying over the keys with mechanical precision. He wasn't just a fighter. His engineering skills were indispensable, and they needed to act fast. Vrogar paced the room, his large frame making the space seem smaller, while Talina kept her senses alert, ready to intervene at the first sign of danger. The tension in the room was thick, the seconds stretching as Xena worked tirelessly to crack the encryption codes. The screen flickered, the words flashing before her eyes like a jigsaw puzzle. Slowly, the information began to reveal itself, and as Xena deciphered the data, a sense of dread washed over her. "What is it?" Cale asked, noticing the shift in her expression. "It's worse than I thought," Xena replied, her voice low. "The Elders weren't just trying to take control of this ship. They were trying to unlock a weapon, something they've been building for centuries. This ship, it's not just a warship. It's a vessel for a doomsday device, one that could annihilate entire star systems." The room fell silent as the weight of her words sank in. "If they complete the activation, the galaxy will be at their mercy," Xena continued, her mind racing. "We can't let that happen." Vrogar's posture shifted. "Then let's destroy it. Blow it up. No more Eldrith, no more threats." Xena shook her head, her brow furrowed in concentration. "If we destroy the ship, we destroy the only thing that can stop the weapon. The Eldrith's plans won't be stopped by brute force. We need to find a way to deactivate the doomsday device." Cale, ever the pragmatist, crossed his arms. "Then how do we do that? The clock's ticking and we're running out of time." Xena's eyes narrowed as she scanned the decryption data. "There's an override code buried in the system, but we'll need to reach the core of the ship where the weapon's main power source is. That's the only way to disable it." Talina stepped forward, her voice calm but resolute. "We've faced worse odds. We'll get there." Vrogar cracked his knuckles. "Lead the way, Captain. We've got your back." The room filled with an air of resolve. They had been through impossible situations before, but this was their most dangerous mission yet. The path ahead was treacherous, and they would be outnumbered. But there was one thing that had gotten them this far: human ingenuity. The very thing that the Eldrith had underestimated since the beginning. Xena looked at each member of her crew, her eyes steady. "We're not just going to save this ship. We're going to save the galaxy. Let's move." The crew immediately sprang into action, gathering their weapons and preparing for the next phase of their mission. There was no room for fear now. There was only the certainty that they were about to face their greatest challenge yet, but they would rise to meet it. The Eldrith had thought of them as insects, insignificant and weak. But now, as Xena led her crew toward the heart of the ship, she knew they were about to show the galaxy what humans were truly capable of.